A week later, under a sky thick with clouds, the signal was given. James pulled his black sedan up to the side gate of the monastery, the engine idling like a low growl. Jasmine emerged from the side door, her habit replaced by a simple trench coat she had hidden away, and she didn't look back at the stone walls that had been her prison and her protection for 10 years. As she slid into the passenger seat, the smell of leather and gasoline replaced the scent of incense and old wood. James reached out and handed her the Orsini rosary. "We're leaving it all behind," he said, his voice firm. He shifted the car into gear and they sped away into the night, the headlights cutting through the darkness. For the first time in their lives, they weren't following a path laid out by the church. They were driving toward a future that was entirely their own. Life in the city was a shock of neon and noise. They found a small apartment above a carpentry workshop where the smell of sawdust reminded Jasmine of her father's hands. While Jasmine sketched her family's old patterns, James found work as a restorer for a local theater, painting elaborate backdrops and building stage sets. He had a natural raw talent for the brush, a skill he had kept hidden his entire life. They traded their robes for paint-stained denim, blending into the city's growing art scene. For a few months, they lived like the people they were always meant to be. But the city wasn't big enough to hide them forever. James felt the weight of his uncle's reach every time a dark car slowed down on their street. He knew the Archbishop didn't just want his nephew back. He wanted to bury the scandal they had become. "We can't stop looking over our shoulders," Jasmine whispered one night. "He's coming, James. I can feel it." One evening, while they were preparing to move again, Jasmine finally reached for the leather bag James had guarded since the night of the crash. He had kept it locked away, never letting it out of his sight. When she opened it, she didn't find prayer books or sermons. Inside were dozens of professional oil paints, worn charcoal sticks, and a set of high-quality brushes, some still stained with colors from a life he lived in secret. "You've been an artist this whole time," Jasmine whispered, looking at him in awe. James looked at the brushes, then at his hands. "My uncle said painting was a distraction from God," he admitted. "He made me promise to never touch a brush again. That bag, it was the only part of myself I refused to give him. It was the final proof that they were both victims of the same man." But before they could speak another word, a heavy knock echoed through the door, the kind of knock that only comes from someone who doesn't need an invitation. The door opened, and the cold, familiar presence of James' uncle filled the small room. The Archbishop looked around at the paint-stained brushes and Jasmine's sketches with a thin, judgmental lip. "You've traded your destiny to live like common people," he said, his voice flat and professional. He looked at Jasmine as if she were a problem to be solved, not a person. He reminded them that the Orsini name was a property of the church's history, and by taking her, James had stolen from the institution itself. James stepped in front of Jasmine, feeling the weight of the man's immense power. This wasn't a family visit, it was an audit. "Leave her out of this," James said, his voice hard. "Her family has already paid enough for your legacy." The Archbishop looked deep into his nephew, his eyes devoid of any familial warmth. He offered James a cold binary choice: return to the church and tell the world Jasmine had kidnapped him, or stay and face a scandal that would ruin both of them. It was a calculated move to destroy Jasmine's reputation, to save the churches. James looked at the olive wood rosary on the table, the last tide of a life he was born into, and pushed it toward his uncle. "I'm not a kidnapping victim, and I'm not a priest," James said. "Tell the world whatever helps you sleep at night." He took Jasmine's hand, and they walked out past Archbishop's men, leaving the safety of the church for the uncertainty of the streets. They vanished into the neon blur of the city. Two people who owned nothing but their truth. The world would call it a scandal. But as they stood in the rain of a new decade, they knew that a love this real was anything but sacred.